Hi everyone. So I just want to take a few minutes to follow up on the ProQuest video that you just watched. The video compared Google search engine to scholarly databases such as ProQuest and gave you some ideas as to what the differences are between these two different ways to obtain research or information for your classes. And so I just wanted to follow up on that in terms of how it applies to our class and give you a little bit more to think about. So one thing I want to emphasize as we start off this screencast is that Google searching is not a bad thing. Maybe ProQuest came off as suggesting that Google is really problematic, and it does have some problems in an academic setting, but generally it's not a bad thing. I mean, we all use Google and we use it all the time. I jump on Google every day to search for different things, and quite often I find myself trusting a lot of the sources that I pull up. And so it's just a really invaluable tool in our society, and we depend on it all the time. So I just thought I would put in the topic that we're looking at in philosophy so we can see how helpful Google can be. And then I'm going to compare the Google search on our topic to what this might look like in one of the many databases that we have access to through our library. And so let me just walk you through this process. So not surprisingly, the first thing that comes up is Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. And I don't know about you, but I use Wikipedia all the time. Of course, we have to use Wikipedia with some mindfulness because anybody can go in and edit Wikipedia. It's kind of like a giant collaborative encyclopedia that anyone can go in and edit. And so, you just have to be careful about the information that you take from Wikipedia, but generally speaking, it's a useful site. So as I start scrolling down, I notice that I see an article on happiness from Psychology Today. It says research on how to increase positive moods and capitalize on your strengths. And it ties it to the psychology movement. I know I'm familiar with Psychology Today, and I know that even though that's a mainstream magazine that you could buy in a grocery store, it's still a pretty reputable magazine, and so I would be interested in looking at something like that. Scrolling down a little bit more, I see they've got some TED Talks here about happiness. Well, Eric and I obviously think highly of TED Talks. We've already included at least one in our class this semester, Barry Short's. And so if I look at this, I see that they've got some from psychologists, journalists, Buddhist monks, various people giving talks on happiness. Well, those could be great resources for this research paper that you have coming up. And so there's definitely something to be said for really quick and easy information that you can find through Google, and we're certainly not opposed to using Google. But one thing I want to point out is that when I type in happiness, I get 180,000 results. And that's a little daunting to me because even though I find some things on the first page that I like, I don't really know what else is out there. And I don't know, maybe the best thing that I want is on page 65, and how am I ever going to get there? I find that most students who use Google only look at the first page, and so it seems rather random or arbitrary in terms of how we're accessing information through Google, and that may not always be useful. A couple other things I want you to think about in terms of search engines, internet search engines, and why they could be problematic when you're researching for academic classes is that as the ProQuest pointed out, there's often a lot of garbage on the internet and things that, we can easily get sucked into with a flashy title, and then after we read it for 5 or 10 minutes, we might think to look at the author, and then we realize, oh, this is not anybody credible. They don't really know what they're talking about. And so sometimes we could get pulled into things that aren't very credible, and you really want to be careful not to cite stuff like that in your paper that you don't know whether it's credible or not, because that totally undermines what you're writing about. And so I tend to liken the internet to TJ Maxx. I don't know if any of you shop at TJ Maxx or Marshalls, but I always find when I go in those stores that I can usually find one or two great shirts or shoes or something, but I better be willing to spend 3 hours looking for it because there are just so much garbage and so many things that don't suit my tastes or personality, and you just have to spend a lot of time weeding through it to try to find the right thing, and you spend a lot of time in the dressing room trying to figure out if it's the right thing. And so I always joke that the internet is kind of like going to TJ Maxx. You'll probably get a good deal. There's probably some great stuff in there, but you better have a lot of time to search for what you're looking for. Okay, other things to think about with Google, it's not peer reviewed. So nobody has been hired to vet this information. Nobody is on Google checking facts or validity. Nobody is monitoring what gets put up on the internet. And so you really don't know unless it's coming from a publication that you're familiar with. You don't know if what's going up on a blog has any credibility whatsoever. If you've never heard of Psychology Today, well, you'd have to take an extra step and research it and find out if it really is something that you can trust. So it's not a vetted source, and that is not the case for databases, which are peer reviewed, meaning there are people who are hired to look at all of those things before they go into print. And so you know what you're getting is just a higher quality than what you're sometimes finding on Google. Now, that's not to say that you can't find the exact same stuff. It's quite possible that if I went to a database, I would find this exact same article or this exact same link in a database. I'd just be finding it. I would just know because I was in the database that it was credible. Whereas when it's coming up in Google, I really don't know what its credibility is unless I've researched it or I have some familiarity with it. Other things to think about. On the internet, some of the stuff that comes up can be kind of thin. So like I'm looking at this one right here, 9 Simple Steps to Happiness. Well, that sounds a little trite. I don't know, sometimes you get things that have sort of a Reader's Digest quality to them, which means they're there to pique your interest or maybe entertain you for 15 minutes while you're waiting for the dentist, but they don't necessarily provide substantial research to back up what they're saying. And so it just may be too thin to use for an academic purpose. The other thing I'd like to point out is that sometimes on Google you find a lot of stuff that isn't really relevant to what you're looking for. So when I search The Good Life, the first thing that comes up is thegoodlifemusic.com, and I know that really doesn't have anything to do with what I'm looking at in my philosophy and writing class. Now here we've got Wikipedia, so that might be useful. Down here we've got The Good Life. It looks like this might be a movie. Down here we've got a book called The Good Life. I'm not sure if that's relevant to what we're looking at all. Here we've got a YouTube video. I'm pretty sure that's not relevant. This is The Good Life. It's an English-style pub restaurant. I mean, you're getting all kinds of things that are just absolutely not relevant at all to what we're looking for. And you'd have to spend a lot of time. This would, I mean, look at the search results. We've got, what, 3,920,000,000? Wow, that's exhausting just thinking about that. And so one thing that a database is going to do is it's just going to focus you. I mean, you may get 100 or a few hundred results, but you're certainly not going to get 3 billion, almost 4 billion results for something when you're within a database. Okay, so now you'll see I have a totally different interface up here, and I'm now in a database. This database is called Academic Search Premier. Maybe some of you are familiar with it from high school research or college research. This is one of many databases that you can look at that the library has access to. So let me talk in general about databases for a minute or two, a couple minutes, and then I'll look at this particular search with you in here. So what is a database? Well, I use the TJ Maxx metaphor, but let me give you a different one. Let's think about straining something. Let's think about panning for gold. And, you know, if you took everything on the internet and you ran it through a strainer as if you were panning for gold and you separated out all the muck and the pebbles and the gunk, what you would be left with is ideally the gold. In this case, what you would be left with is promising material that you know is trustworthy and that you know has been vetted. Now, that's not to say that you won't disagree with some of the things that you read in a database. I mean, certainly some of these things are still controversial, and you may not like the research that supports it, and you may go out and find other scholarly articles that dispute it. So that's not to say everything is necessarily fact. It's just that it's been run through a process. And so we know that there's at least some accountability there, whereas on the internet there's none. So, so this is the good stuff that you're left with for the most part. Where do databases come from? Where does the concept come from? Why do they exist? Well, essentially databases are scholarly banks of information. Google is a huge bank of information, but it's just like anything goes on Google. Whereas in a database, it's a place where information is stored, but that information has to be scholarly. It has to be vetted. And who buys these databases? Well, usually libraries subscribe to databases. Why? Because libraries have a goal to promote research, knowledge, truth seeking in our culture. And so this is a service that they would really feel strongly about providing to the public. They want you to have access to the best research that's out there. And so libraries actually pay for databases, and you as students pay for databases when you pay your tuition to Front Range Community College. That goes toward, part of that goes toward library databases that then in turn you get to use as a student. So you can find all kinds of things in databases that you couldn't have access to on Google. For example, sometimes if I'm at the dentist's office and I'm reading something in a magazine like National Geographic or something, I know that if I go to that website, I'm going to have to pay for that article. I'm going to have to pay for a subscription to National Geographic. However, if I go into a database, I can find that for free. And so that's one great thing about databases. Some of the downsides, they're not as easy to access to Google. It's a less familiar interface. As you're looking at this here, you're probably thinking, whoa, that's a little scary. I'm not used to being on this page, whereas Google is so straightforward. And some of the research that you come up with is going to be too sophisticated. So look at this example: construction and validation of a measure of integrated well-being in 7 languages. That's over my head. That's probably something that's going to be too academic or too scholarly. And so that is a problem sometimes with databases. The upside, you're getting good material. You can trust it. And also you're learning search skills that are going to be helpful for you as you continue to do research in all your other classes. So let's just look at this particular search that I did. I put in the good life and happiness. So I combined those two phrases. And when I did my search, I told them I want full text, which means I don't want you to tell me how to get to the library so I can find this. I want you to give me the actual articles. And I also gave them a range. I said I only want things from 2009 to 2013 because that's probably the most current research. And what it came up with was 128 results. That's still a lot, but that is not nearly as daunting as the 4 billion results that came up in Google. And so as I scroll through these, I see some things that, again, are a little too sophisticated, too literary. But when I get down a little bit further, I find this: well-being, happiness, and why relationships matter. Well, that's really interesting to me. I'm somebody who thinks relationships are very important to happiness, and so I might want to look at that article. Understanding what's good for us, that sounds really practical. And when I look at the publication, I see it comes from a journal called Ethical Theory and Moral Practice. Well, that ties directly in with the kinds of things that we're studying in our ethics class. And so I would definitely want to look at that. I'm looking at some other articles here. This is interesting. Liberal equality for the common good. I might be interested in seeing what that has to say. This one here says the pursuit of happiness has many avenues. Well, that's really interesting. I'd be interested in clicking on that one as well. So, okay, here's the term that Eric loves to use, eudaimonia in America. This might be really impressive to your philosophy teacher. If you went out and found an article on eudaimonia specifically, this is a journal of religion and public life. That could be a really interesting article. So I have 10 sources on this first page, and even though some of them are a little over my head, as I scroll through them, I quickly found at least 5 things that I think would be directly relevant to the kinds of things we're talking about in our class right now. And so so that's just a quick little show and tell comparison of doing a search in Google versus doing the same kind of search in one of these databases. So I hope I've illustrated for you what the value of these databases are. Even though they're a little bit harder to get to and they're less familiar than Google, it's a really great skill to have. Once you get comfortable searching in databases, it's something that's going to serve you well in all of your academic career and possibly beyond that as well.